This is an Odyssey original.
This is War in Ukraine Daily. I'm Charles Feldman.
I'm Mike Simpson from the KNX Odyssey Studios in Los Angeles. Western Ukraine has escaped the worst of Russia's invasion, region that borders no fewer than 4 NATO countries, mostly calm until now. Russian forces launched a barrage of missiles on the outskirts of Lviv, key city in that part of the country. We'll take you there for reaction, and then we'll go to the other side of Ukraine. In the east, I'll talk with somebody in Kharkiv, which has been under nearly daily bombardment since this all began.
President Biden had a long chat with China's leader over the war. Can the Chinese be talked out of providing aid and support to the floundering Russian army? And Vladimir Putin held a big rally today in Moscow to drum up support for the invasion, which, of course, he isn't calling an invasion. We'll take a closer look at how Putin gets out of the mess of his own creation. We start, though, in western Ukraine in the city of Lviv, and that is where we find journalist Phil Ittner. Phil, we've talked to you many times since the Russian invasion from the city that you are now in, and we've always pointed out that it has been, relatively calm, relatively safe there, but today not so.
Not at all. No, it was quite the alarm clock this morning at 6:30 in the morning when the air raid sirens began, and we have had the occasional air raid siren in this city over the last 2+ weeks that I've been here. But it's usually because there's something flying in our direction, usually headed north to a place called Lutz, or there was the strike at a military facility about 30 miles west of here. But generally, they're not coming directly to Lviv city. Well, today it was different. The air raid sirens went off, and shortly after that, around 6:30 in the morning, as I say, we could hear the distant sound of explosions. Those who are a little closer to the impact zone north of the city, about 4 miles from the city center, were able to record a huge plume of black smoke emerging from what turned out to be an aircraft repair facility that was apparently struck by Russian ordnance coming from the Black Sea, some of which the Ukrainians say they were able to intercept, but at least 4 missile strikes on that aircraft repair facility, and it has shook this city, which has heretofore been pretty much a peaceful place.
And what do we know about this facility other than repairing aircraft? Does that mean strategic target for the Russians, especially if either, they're fixing the planes there, or if maybe Western supplies have been coming through there to help in other parts of Ukraine?
That's exactly what people are here talking about, is the fact that maybe this was part of an effort to fix up any kind of planes that might be coming from the West, and because of that, it was considered by the Russians a legitimate target. Of course, Vladimir Putin himself saying if the West continues to supply arms to Ukraine, that they will consider those supply routes as legitimate targets. So the smoke itself was extremely black, and I've been to my fair share of war zones and seen my fair share of airstrikes. Generally, that means something is burning pretty darn hot, and not a lot of debris burning. So a lot of folks suspecting perhaps it was some sort of fuel depot that also got hit. The mayor of town did hold a press conference today to explain what had happened. He said that because work had ceased in that facility, that only one person was wounded, but it does knock out a facility that could be used to repair any aircraft that may be coming from the West or indeed are currently involved in any kind of air campaign that the Ukrainians are conducting, because clearly the Russians still don't have air superiority here. It's also worth noting that the missiles did come from the Black Sea, so it is possible that there was a naval participation, Russian naval participation in this activity, but it just goes to add to the sense in town here that while we may be far in the West because of the capacity of Russia's military, we are far from being completely shielded by our distance.
Of course, as we've discussed before, you are very close, Lviv, to Poland, closer than other parts of Ukraine, certainly, a NATO country. How much of a concern is there that by design, or more likely by accident, that as these barrages get closer and closer, and now today in the city that you're in, that one might end up hitting a NATO country?
Well, it's very much a concern. I know that the Poles are very concerned about it as well, and they're floating a whole bunch of different ideas on how to contest that. But at this point, because of the distance, it may actually be playing in our favor because when they launch something that is longer distance, it tends to be a little bit more controlled because they have satellite imagery. They're basing it on much more integrated systems, whereas if they're using their Grad system, missile systems, for example, which are medium-range surface-to-surface missiles, well, that's just a barrage of artillery. So you're just blanketing the space, whereas when you're shooting off a couple of, cruise missiles or longer distance firing, they tend to be a little bit more precise because, of course, you're sending at larger distances. But nevertheless, we are very much concerned here in the West, and I know that the Poles are very concerned as well. It's just too close for comfort.
Phil Ittner, journalist there in Lviv, Ukraine. Phil, thanks again. One by one, the Russian military is reducing Ukrainian cities in the eastern part of the country to mostly rubble. What started as a more restrained, targeted series of strikes has now become almost indiscriminate bombing in some spots.
The city of Kharkiv near the Russian border has been absorbing bombardment for almost a month straight at this point. Alexandra lives there with her husband, her mother-in-law, and her cat, and they haven't left despite daily attacks by the Russians. Thank you for joining with us and taking the time. How is the city now? You're there, as we said. As we also said, it has come into some brutal attacks from the Russians. Can you describe what the city is like now?
Of course, thank you for your invitation. Now it's night in Kharkiv, so we are staying at home because of the curfew, and Russians like to attack us at night, so we are waiting for the opportunity to sleep well this night because the night before was quite calm, and they attacked us in the morning. So we are living at war. You can't you don't know what to expect the other day. You're just hoping for the best. You're right. There are several areas of our city that are almost destroyed. People can't live here, and they are forced to leave their homes to flee to different areas of Ukraine or to travel abroad to save their lives. So, especially women with children. They try to escape the city, but a lot of people are staying here. We're trying to live our common lives as it's possible during the war. Our civil council and our communal services, they are doing their best to provide us a good level of comfort in the city. We have water, we have electricity, we have good internet connection as well. We have some food and needed supplies in the stores. We run out of some medicines, but we are waiting for humanitarian aid. It's going from different Ukrainian cities and our neighbors from Poland, Lithuania, and different European countries.
I wanted to ask you about that. When you go out and you try and get something you need, what is it like in the stores? I mean, can you get your hands on the stuff that you do need day to day, and how often those supplies getting in? Because we've been talking in different areas, and some people have said, you know what, all that's at the coffee shop is bread and coffee, and that's the sign on the door because that's all we can get right now in some spots.
It depends on the part of the city because I live in some calm city district. We don't have a lot of missiles here, so it's quite easy for us to get some needed supplies. We have a supermarket in our little area. In our neighborhood, we have more distant supermarkets, and you can likely find here most of needed products, milk, bread, some groceries. It's not a big deal. It was at the first days of war, maybe first week, a lot of people panicked because they thought that we will run out of supplies very quickly. But we have our roads unblocked, so we can our stores can provide us some food supplies, and it's not so bad now.
Alexandra, let's find out a little bit about you and your family. What do you and your husband and mother-in-law do? And I wouldn't be forgiven by cat lovers if I also
Yes,
didn't
ask about the cat.
Yes,
How's the cat?
How's the cat? What kind of cat is it?
Oh, he's okay. He was quite nervous for the first week. It was more loud than now because there were a lot of more strikes, some air strikes, and he was nervous and was hiding somewhere deep in the house. But now he's quite calm and can sleep even if it's noisy outside. But we are almost all time during the day staying at home. As I said, we have a curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., so we can't go outside. Sometimes we go to the market or to get some maybe water or something else, but most of our time we're staying at home. I'm working remotely, and my husband not working at the moment because he's a teacher at the university, and mother-in-law can't work too because he can't get to her workplace, so we are staying at home together.
And what kind of work do you do?
I'm working for the IT company and the HR department. Especially, I'm working with corporate policies and some analytics.
We've talked to people before who have told us just how strange it is, how surreal it is to work and be there on your laptop and doing your job, and still at the same time you're in a war zone. There's the specter of airstrikes or bombs. I mean, what is that? How do you even square that in your mind?
Work is a good opportunity to clear your mind from these terrific thoughts, from this anxiety. You can focus on something. You can, pretend you have a usual life, normal life. And this war is not a short term. I think it may be for a couple of months. So we need to find ways to not give up, to work, to pay taxes for our government, to provide more supplies for our defenders. We need to support our economics. So I think everyone who can work now should do this, and everyone who can support local people, who can support defenders, should do this as well.
So about 3.5 million Ukrainians, as I'm sure you know, have left your country, Poland, other places. Why did you and your family stay?
It's about, I don't know, I don't feel myself in extreme danger right now. We used to war. It's cruel, but as it is. We live, as I said, in a quite calm district. I have a lot of relatives here. I have my parents that they live, my husband's grandmother, and we feel our responsibility for them. We're responsible. We should help. We try to help someone who stays here. We're not volunteers, but we can provide some local help. For example, go to the market, buy some food, check someone's parents who stayed here. For example, I have a coworker. She left with her daughter to the Western Ukraine, but her mother stays here, and we live nearby, so I can help and check her. It's a little help, but someone should stay in the city so it still looks alive. We are not completely blocked in the city. We can live our lives how it's possible. But for now, I don't think that it's completely needed for me to leave or for my family. A lot of people left almost 6.5 million moved through Ukraine to the western parts, more safe to protect them and their children. And I think it's quite hard for people here to provide them support, to provide them some workplaces, to provide food. And I think that I can stay here, I can embrace myself and not be such a heavy. I think I can stay here and make easier lives for there who need to leave. So I don't stay at their place.
Alexandra in Kharkiv with her husband, mother-in-law, and the cat. Alexandra, pleasure talking with you. Thank you for giving us the time, and stay safe, and we wish you the best, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks for talking to us again. Short break, and then the Biden administration seeks to keep China firmly on the sidelines of this war. The U.S. is looking to make sure China stays out of this conflict. The president had a nearly 2-hour-long video call this morning with China's leader, Xi Jinping. President warned China of consequences if it starts actively helping the Russian efforts.
China said after the call that conflict and confrontation not in anyone's interest, but it did not blame Russia. With us is Danny Bello, professor of international relations at Webster University in St. Louis. He's an expert on NATO-Russia relations, ethnic conflicts, and China. Thanks for being with us. So the issue with China is problematic, right? Because on the one hand, they're really trying to have it both ways. They're trying to say we're not supportive of one country invading another, but they don't want to condemn Russia. We're warning them of consequences. What kind of consequences could we slap them with?
Good afternoon. Well, first thing we have to keep in mind is that China is the largest trading partner for both Russia and Ukraine. And as a consequence, it can become a mediator in this conflict. And as a consequence of that, it could have a permanent footprint in the region. At the same time, with the onset of the conflict, we can see that Russia and China's bond, both economic and political bond, is becoming stronger. And this is something that Washington does not want to see. In terms of a response, Biden's options are rather limited considering the large economic impact that China has on the world.
Okay, so limited as in what could we do even if it was limited? Or basically, can we just send out the warnings and hope for the best?
Well, for now, we're seeing the strong bond between Beijing and Moscow, and that bond is likely to become stronger and stronger. So one of the options that Biden could do is create some sort of economic incentive for China to create a rift between Beijing and Moscow. However, the options are very limited, and it is likely that that bond will continue to be deeper between Beijing and Moscow.
I mean, for example, unlike with Russia, it wouldn't do us very much good, would it, to slap China with sanctions because we get so much from China, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot.
That's right. And on top of that, if the U.S. becomes even more adversarial towards China now, we will likely see an even stronger movement from China to Russia. So the bond will increase if we decide to use some sort of coercive measures.
So then we hope that she just does realize that what Putin is doing is completely wrong, and then is unsettled enough that whatever bond and partnership they have, forming this kind of axis against the West, which they say is dictating everything, that he's not willing to go all the way with him, that partnership does have some stopgaps in it, or some stops.
Well, what Biden is going to try to do is to say to Xi Jinping that China's position, and this is something that we saw in the readout from the White House, that China should be more aligned with the West, considering its economic bonds with Europe and the US. But in terms of practically trying to create a deep rift between Moscow and Beijing, unfortunately, it's not unlikely to happen, at least in the near future.
Are we seeing in the long term, maybe even the medium term, a sort of tectonic shift in the world order that has been the case post-World War II? Is that what's happening before our very eyes?
Well, if we look at the Kremlin's perspective, certainly the operation that's being undertaken now in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin perceives this as a change in the entire security architecture of Europe for the foreseeable future. So considering the magnitude of that goal and the impact it has on creating a new rift between Europe and Russia, it will certainly have global implications.
China likes status, though. They like to be seen as not being told what to do. And if they were to help too much, I mean, the eyes of the world would be looking at them in a very negative light, as they're looking at Russia right now. So what about a sort of consensus that, okay, maybe they help a little bit behind the scenes, but nothing way out front, nothing super noticeable, because they don't want to be seen as aiding Vladimir Putin right out in invading this other country, again, because they've said you shouldn't invade another country.
Well, from China's perspective, I think the best position it can take is to become a mediator in this conflict. So to be a credible mediator, it cannot take a decisive position either on Ukraine's side or Russia's side. But behind the scenes, what we're likely to see is China providing ammunition and goods to maintain Russia's operations, but not tanks or aircraft to mount an invasion.
Danny Bello, professor of international relations, Webster University in St. Louis. Vladimir Putin was at this big pro-war rally in front of a hand-picked crowd in Moscow earlier today, praised his country's troops as they continue to strike cities in Ukraine, insisted this is all necessary, he says, to prevent an unspecified genocide.
The rhetoric seems to indicate the war might continue for a while, despite some progress on peace talks. Ambassador John Herbst is with us. He is the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine from 2003 to 2006.
Let's talk about those peace talks. I mean, most wars end at the table, right? Instead of someone just conquering totally somebody else. So do you have some hope that they are at least getting somewhere?
I think that Putin still wants to achieve the same objectives that launched his new invasion of Ukraine. In other words, he wants to completely subordinate Ukraine to the Kremlin. I believe those peace talks are being held at much lower levels than Putin, of course, because he understands, even if he doesn't want to acknowledge, that there have been some problems with his operation and he may need another way out. But since his own conditions for an end to peace, to an end to the war, are much harsher than those his negotiators are offering, it's clear that his negotiators are not necessarily offering things that are real.
And looking at the pictures earlier of those that rally that we were just referring to in Moscow, a lot of people seemingly enthusiastic for the Russian side of this. Is that because they're getting all of this disinformation through censored media, or is there a large body of people, do you think, in Russia that are supportive of what Putin is doing and they think it's the right thing?
It's unclear what percentage of Russians know what's going on in Ukraine. I believe that percentage is extremely small. And the Russian media, which has become much more under the control of the Kremlin in recent days, they've banned the few small independent television stations that existed, before this new invasion. They've now made it a 15-year possible crime to provide quote-unquote false information about what's going on in Ukraine. So there's been a real crackdown on the flow of news in country. And of course, the news they get from state media is completely distorted.
I did see
so
somebody.
Many people do support the Kremlin because they don't have real information. We really don't know the numbers.
I was just going to say, I did see somebody say, you know what, if Vladimir Putin holds any rally, though, you'd fill it with 85,000 government workers, and they have to come and they have to cheer. So that's what's going to happen. How do you break through that, though, when you've just detailed how everything is run by the state media? I mean, we've got Western, Telegram channels now, the social media service. We've got the Arnold Schwarzenegger video that he says at least broke in a little bit, maybe amongst some fans. But how do you get that message into Russia if maybe that's, in the end, what it's going to take to get more people to realize what's actually happening?
If we are smart, and bold, and I'm not sure that we are. I'm now referring to the U.S. government. We are using our formidable cyber capacity to, without letting anyone know, remove barriers that get in the way of Western social media getting into Russia. That's what we should be doing. Because, let the Russian people see the pictures of the bombed hospitals, the bombed theaters, and their picture of the war will begin to approximate the truth, and that will be a very serious problem for Putin.
Do you have the fear that some, apparently in Washington, are expressing that a desperate Putin would reach, if not for a nuclear option, which does seem somewhat far-fetched, but maybe not, but certainly for a biological and or chemical one?
Look, smart policymakers, prudent policymakers, have to consider all contingencies, including the most dire, like the use of nukes by the Kremlin. But we have a chattering class and even policymakers who are not sufficiently steeped in history. Because if they were, they'd understand that, well, Putin is a danger. He is not as dangerous as the former Soviet Union. And we went toe-to-toe with the former Soviet Union when our critical interests were on the line, in Berlin in 1961, in Cuba in 1962, and we protected our interests even as the nuclear sword of Damocles hung over all of us. The same, if we could do it with the Soviet Union, which was much more formidable, we can do it with Putin, who's not nearly as powerful. And people need to know history. They need to know our strengths, which are formidable. We are much stronger than Russia in every category except nukes, and we are a peer power when it comes to nukes. And we can deal with this and not let Putin frighten us out of sending the weapons to Ukraine that Ukraine needs. And sadly, that's been true also of the administration, which talks too much about escalatory perceptions by Putin, when Putin's the one who's escalating.
Does he already seem desperate? I saw some commentary today going back to your point saying, look, he's not at the negotiation table yet, but they were saying he's going to bomb and bomb and bomb and terrorize Ukrainians and kill civilians. So when he does go to the table, his position is stronger because, as terrible as it is, he's leveled cities. So he can look across and say, you know what, are you done? I've done all this. Let's give me what I want.
That only works for him if his leveling cities destroys the will of the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military. And it hasn't over the past 3 weeks. And this could go on for 6 months or longer. I don't think it's going to achieve that effect. The people of Ukraine understand that it's not just their country's sovereignty that's at risk, it's their liberties. Russia was an authoritarian regime a year ago, but it's a far more oppressive authoritarian regime today as a result of the measures Putin has taken in order to, quote-unquote, secure his position at home while he conducts an obviously failed war abroad.
Ambassador, thank you. Ambassador John Herbst, Senior Director, Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, 2003 to 2006. This is an Odyssey original. Find us and others on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher.